For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders. In the heavens and on the earth, he has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. I've known this story since I've been a little kid, since I've been in elementary school. I've known this story. I know it top and bottom. I know all sides of it. I could probably recite it to you by heart. I've known this story. And every time I hear this story, I think of the victory. I think of the victory of the Lord and how he's been faithful to Daniel through all this time, and yet in a pit of lions, he's faithful again. I've seen this story. I've heard it before. Every time I go to the triumph, every time that I read that Daniel got out of the lion's den without a scratch, man, I think that, God, you're so good. You're such a gracious God. You're such a victorious God. You're a powerful God, and I choose to follow you because you're good. And lately, I don't know, but I've been reading this story in the Bible, and I don't get that feeling. I have questions all over my mind that are swirling around, not focusing on the victory and focusing on the what if. What if there's something more than my little puny elementary school brain could understand? What if there's something more about this story than Daniel being cuddled in a pit with a bunch of big cats, like they're having a grand old time, and God overcomes? What if there's so much more to this story that seems just like a victory? What if? If you guys haven't been around for the past few weeks, we've been in a series focused on Daniel. And we've learned about all the times where God has been faithful. We've learned about where Daniel came from. He came from a land called Judah that was far away and full of Jews. And he came from his homeland. He was captured and sent off into exile to Babylon. And as the time went by, Daniel went from being a slave, where all he could do was obey his masters, to going up and up and up the social ladder, to where now, in Daniel chapter 6, King Darius has appointed Daniel to be one of his chief advisors, where he comes only second to the king. And Daniel's enemies and people that don't like him and don't want him to be in power and don't want him even on the king's good side, they become jealous. And they're trying to find a way to make Daniel mess up. We've seen Daniel's track record so far, and it's been clean, totally clean. We've seen his faithfulness to God, and his faithfulness to God correlates to God's faithfulness to him, it seems. We're in Daniel 6 today. If you have your Bibles, go ahead and open up. So in this time, we're going to see God's victory, and we're going to look at the what ifs. So the governors and administrators are trying to make Daniel mess up so the king will have it out for him. We're in verse 4. At this, the administrators and the governors tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. It says back in verse 3 that Daniel was so distinguished among the administrators and the governors by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. And so these administrators and these governors, they didn't want that. They wanted to be in charge. And so they had it out for Daniel. You know what's cool about Daniel? He's been through so much stuff so far, but he hasn't messed up. It says in verse 4, they could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. This guy had no faults. This guy was faithful to God. He served him diligently. He loved him. He wanted other people to know who his God was. So we're going on to verse 6. And here we find that the administrators and the governors, they still have it out for Daniel. They still want him to get fired. And so they go as a group. And they go to the king and say, "May King Darius live forever. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue a decree and enforce it that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except for you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den." Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm governor, or if I'm king, that sounds like a pretty good deal. If I am someone who really wants people to love me, and I make a law that nobody else can be in my place in people's lives, I would be okay with that. King Darius really likes Daniel, and he doesn't even think of Daniel at this time probably, and I think of him just being kind of, not an airhead, but willing to go along with things that sound good. And boy, does this sound good. "Now, your majesty," they say, "issue this decree and put it in writing, so that it cannot be altered in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be appealed." So, King Darius put the decree in writing. Now, if you read this text and you look closely at what's happening, these governors and these administrators, they know that Daniel worships the God of Judah. They know that Daniel worships a different God than they worship. They know that Daniel's God means so much to him that he would do anything for him. Daniel's been faithful from the beginning to the current time, so why would he not be faithful to his God then? And by putting that anyone who chooses to disobey this law goes into the lion's den, it's a sure death for Daniel. These people knew what they were doing. King Darius was oblivious. And the decree was put in writing. Now, the thing that I love about Daniel, something else, is his response to this. So Daniel learns that this decree has been published, right? What does he do? I don't know about you guys, but if I heard that this decree was happening, I would have a panic attack. I would probably pack up all my things, steal away in the night, or hide in my closet. Or, better yet, I would choose to hide my faith. I don't know about you guys, but sometimes I can be such a coward. If my life is in danger or anything close to me is in danger of problems, I tend to cower. And I tend to hide from the things that can corrupt me instead of face them full on. When something bad is about to happen, I tend to run away instead of stand up to it. Daniel sees this decree. He sees his decree. He knows the outcome. He went home to his upstairs room, where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day, he got on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God just as he had done before. 3 times a day, he gets on his knees and he prays just as he has done before. That's crazy. if I was in Daniel's shoes at this time, that would not have been me. I would have prayed in the closet. I would have prayed in the bathrooms. I would have prayed where nobody saw me. And when I was out in public, I wouldn't say a thing about God because I want to protect my hide. I don't know about you, but what Daniel did was bold. He opened up his curtains that showed all of Jerusalem. Daniel knew that people would see him. He knew that people would walk across, they would see him praying 3 times a day, just as he has done before. Man, this is what Daniel says to himself, I'm imagining. God, you have been faithful to me time and time again, and I'm going to be faithful to you now. I'm going to be faithful to you, and I am not going to back down from this thing that could eat me alive, literally, because I love you so much. And I would die for you, Lord. Do you have the kind of faith to do something that could get you in trouble? To do something that you know is right and you know will serve well to the Lord, but other people will take offense to it. Other people will attack you. Will you be willing to do that? The governors and the administrators, they knew that this would happen. Then they go as a group. We're in verse 11. They went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So, here we've got him. We've got Daniel finally. He's going to the lion's den and he's going to die. They brought him to King Darius and said, Your Majesty, did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human being except to you, Your Majesty, would be thrown into the lion's den? The king was speechless. He didn't know that this would happen. He didn't know that this would happen to Daniel. He couldn't do anything about it. He tried to save him, but the law was the law. He couldn't change it. So, King Darius, the king that he was, though determined to rescue Daniel, and he couldn't, he gave the order. He brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The last thing the king said to him was, May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you. May your God, who you serve continually, rescue you. I don't believe in your God, but I have faith that your God can change things, that your God can do miracles. May your God, who you serve continually, rescue you. King Darius that night, he was tossing and turning. He didn't eat, he didn't sleep, he didn't do anything. Gosh, I would have been so terrified. King Darius wakes up the next morning. At the crack of dawn, he goes and he sprints over to the lion's den where he had sealed the stone that was on top with his own mark so that nothing could happen. So nothing could make Daniel come out. So the stone, he gets down to where Daniel's at. And when he came near the den, we're in verse 20. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions? Daniel answered, May the king live forever. My God sent his angel and he shut the mouth of the lions. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty. The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. When Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. Now the rest of the story. The people who had come to King Darius and told him that Daniel didn't care about his decrees, he basically blew him off, that he was unfaithful to King Darius. The king had them and their whole families eaten, given to the lions, and they were eaten. But with Daniel, it says that no wound was found on him. How is that possible? There's all of these grown lions that are hungry for meat, and God spares him. God spares Daniel again, because Daniel is faithful and God is faithful. This is something that I've been wrestling with. Daniel has a ton of luck, it seems, right? What if the ending was different? Just think about this for a second. What if the ending was different? What if instead of no wound was found on him? What if he came up with so many? What if Daniel came up with so many wounds that he couldn't walk? What if Daniel, at the crack of dawn, chunks torn out of his body from the lions, what if he was dead? Daniel had this faith that I look up to, that I want to have. Daniel had this faith, and he somehow knew that God would protect him and that God would rescue him from the lions. King Darius hoped that he would. But my question today is, what would happen to your faith if God didn't rescue you? What would have happened to Daniel's faith there if God did not rescue him from the lion's den? I don't know about you, but I would not have faith at this point. And maybe Daniel had faith at this point because that's all that he had left. And all that he had left was to cling to the love of his God. But what if the story ended up being different? Would King Darius respond differently? Would Daniel, if he survived, would he have seen God the same again? So many times I see the victory of this story, but this time, what if many wounds were found on him? And then as I've been reading this, I asked myself, Emily, what if you were in the same situation? What if you were in a situation that you were endangered for your life? And you had this faith, and you served God continually, and you were faithful to him, and you loved him so much, and you knew that he would save you. But for some reason, he chose not to. What if, instead of not having any wounds, Daniel walked up that pit full of them? I know some of you have heard this fake gospel where once you become a Christian and once you follow Jesus, once you decide that this is the path that you want to take, everything will be fine with peaches and roses and unicorns and dark chocolate and marshmallows and all of everything that you've ever wanted, all the 9 yards, because life is good. And God knows the plans that he has for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, right? Plans to give you a hope and a future. Once you follow Jesus, you're good, right? He rescues and he saves. But let me tell you, once you decide to follow Jesus, it will be the hardest decision that you've ever had to make. And though God rescues and saves, that doesn't mean he chooses to in every situation. Asia, her husband and 2 daughters, were one of 3 Christian families in a village of 1,500 families in Pakistan. Her female co-workers had often pressured her to renounce her faith. After a discussion on June 19, 2009, Asia responded to the women by sharing her faith in Christ. "Our Christ is the true prophet of God," she said, and told the women, "Yours is not true." The Muslim women became angry and beat Asia, who was then locked into a closet. An announcement from the mosque loudspeaker declared that Asia would have her face blackened and be paraded through a village on a donkey. Christians informed the police, who rescued her from being beaten, but Muslim authorities later pressed charges against the Christian woman. In North Korea, in April 2016, Pastor Han Chung was brutally murdered. Born in China, he pastored a 3-self church near the North Korean border and led countless North Koreans to Christ. He leaves behind a wife, a son, and a daughter. He's believed to have been killed by North Koreans who likely returned to North Korea. In February, the North Korean government issued an order for Pastor Han to be kidnapped, brought to North Korea, and interrogated. At several steps on their path to death by beheading and crucifixion, 11 indigenous Christian workers near Syria had the option to leave the area and live. The 12-year-old son of a ministry team leader also could have spared his life by denying Christ. The indigenous missionaries were not required to stay at their ministry base in a village near Syria. Rather, the ministry who trained them had entreated them to leave. As the Islamic State, or ISIS, other rebel groups, and Syrian government forces turned this place into a war zone of carnage and destruction. ISIS took over several outlying villages. The Syrian ministry workers in those villages chose to stay in order to provide aid to the name of Christ to survivors. They stayed because they believed that they were called to share Christ with those caught in the crossfire. Those don't sound like victory stories to me. They sound like trusting in their God to pull through for them despite death, despite the outcome, despite the possibilities. And I'm wondering, what is my faith like? It seems that once you become a follower of God, it's not all great. It's not all good living. It's not $1 million houses and I don't even know what a fancy car is, Lamborghini. It's not that. I think it all comes down to trust. Do you trust the Lord to take care of you, to rescue and to save you, even if it might not be the kind of saving that you want? For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and miracles in the heavens and on the earth. This is the God that Daniel worshipped. This is the God that Daniel chose to take a risk on. This is the God that Daniel gave his life for. My question to you today is, if you were in a situation where you had two choices, to walk away from God, to deny him, to say that you don't even know him, or to worship him just like you had before, or even greater, what would you choose? If you're in the middle of a tough situation, do you choose to walk away from the Lord, or do you choose to draw close to the Lord? If you are in the middle of something where you don't know what will happen, do you have confidence in the Lord, or do you try to figure things out on your own? Daniel trusted the Lord differently. He trusted the Lord differently. in the series in Daniel, we see his trust in the Lord and that it's different. Daniel seems like he is not fazed by anything that comes his way because the God of Israel, the God of Jacob, the God of Judah is with him. And he's walking amongst the midst of his people, reigning victorious, rescuing and saving. What kind of trust do you have in God? And will that help you in hard situations? What kind of trust do you have in God? For he is a living God and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and miracles in the heavens and on the earth. Lord, I ask that you would help us trust you, that you would help us learn to trust you more than we ever have before. And in hard situations, may we not turn our back on you. And in hard situations where we ask you to do something and you seem like you don't follow through, you seem like you aren't there for us, would you tell us better? Would you assure us of your love and your kindness, despite the outcome that we didn't want? Lord, thank you for your grace and your mercy and the fact that you are able to rescue and save. Lord, we love you. It's in your name, amen.